I'm here today to talk about Facebook's newsfeed. So just so we're clear, I want to make sure everyone knows what the Facebook newsfeed is. It's this main area here in the middle. On the left, you got your little navigation. On the right is ads. And in the middle is the newsfeed. And basically, the way that Facebook kind of leverages this newsfeed is it wants users to be able to come to the site, consume the most interesting content that's available. So what essentially they're doing is there's a lot of stuff that's kind of competing. There's your grandmother's latest recipe. There's your best friend's new car. There's Nike trying to put in a new shoe. So basically, all this content is just kind of being jammed into the newsfeed. And it's Facebook's job to then provide what's the most interesting to you as the user. So what's really interesting about this is that brands now have the opportunity to kind of jump in with your family and friends. And so when you look at something like Google's platform and you type in shoes, you get organic search results in the main area. And then Google gives the opportunity to brands to advertise kind of around that. What Facebook is kind of doing with this whole newsfeed is they're allowing brands to kind of jump into that newsfeed organically if the content is interesting enough. I want to basically kind of explain where this kind of came from, this concept of connecting these users with this actual content and kind of where this algorithm, she mentioned the word Edgerank, that's the algorithm that we're talking about. That's the algorithm that actually determines what shows and what doesn't show in this newsfeed. And that's so important because if you're a brand and you don't understand this algorithm and you're not taking advantage of it, you're not going to end up here in the newsfeed. I was on Facebook when it originally opened up to colleges in the United States. We didn't have a newsfeed. We just had a profile. Pictures were limited. You'd go and you'd find a cute girl at your college and you'd poke her, and maybe she'd poke you back, and you didn't know. And we used Facebook completely different. There wasn't this concept of newsfeed, and when Facebook realized that there's so much content happening, there's so many, you have your friends changing photos, uploading things, you want to be able to see it all. So they created a newsfeed that was just chronological. It was just stuff as it happened in the newsfeed, just like Twitter. And what Facebook realized was that wasn't going to last long. There was going to be way, way more stuff than that happening in this newsfeed. And so they created a dynamic newsfeed that shows you, ideally, your most interesting content. So that's why when you go in there, you see sometimes something that happened a day ago. Sometimes you see something that happened 15 minutes ago. And it kind of appears random throughout the newsfeed. And what Facebook's trying to do is say, hey, Chad, this is the most interesting content in this newsfeed for you. We want to show you what's the best. So let me jump in. So I keep saying the word Edgerank. What is its definition? Edgerank is an algorithm defined by Facebook to determine what a user sees within their newsfeed. So this algorithm takes place on every single object in Facebook. It takes place for every single user. It's looking at every single user's relationship. So it gets really dynamic, really crazy, really quick. And I know a lot of people, a lot of times, backlash about Edgerank, and they say, I don't want Facebook to show me what's going on or not going on. I want it to be like Twitter. But the reality is Facebook has a vision for the future, and basically that vision is there's going to be so much noise that they really want to create a signal out of. And I think that's really interesting when you go back and look at the parallels of kind of the evolution of the internet. 1992, I was 5 years old, and the internet, how you used the internet back then was a lot of people used a BBS, bulletin board system. So what would they do is they would go on and they'd log into their local area, they'd check out kind of what's relevant to them. Now granted, this was a lot of geeky, nerdy, cutting-edge type people using this system at the time, so it was very particular to kind of those interests. But they would go there and they would try to find the most interesting content and then connect with it. So these BBS systems, their whole kind of operation, what started, was taking interesting content and connecting it to the user. If you move forward, Yahoo saw this internet and they said, okay, these BBS systems, they're great, whatever, they're going to have all this content and there's all this stuff happening in there. But what we need to do is we need to make a directory system to say, when you come to Yahoo and you type and you click on something like finance, we want you to be able to find what the most interesting websites about finance are. If you click weather, then we want you to find the websites that are most interesting about weather. So they took a look at the same problem that kind of the BBS was trying to solve, And they said, we're going to do this with human mandated or moderated systems within Yahoo. And so what they were trying to do is connect, again, the most interesting content back to the user. Google took a look at the same problem. They said, Yahoo, they have it right. Like there's a lot of websites are trying to bring, again, the most interesting content to the users. And I say this repeatedly, but it's an important point. Google said, you guys have a small focus. Well, we think there's going to be millions of web pages, billions of web pages, maybe trillions of web pages. So what we need to do is we need to create an algorithm, and they called it PageRank, to determine what's the most interesting content when you're typing in something into Google. So when you type in finance into Google, we're going to automatically show you the 3 best websites or the 100 best websites, but rank the most interesting website, the second most interesting, third, and so on. So what Google did is they took that same approach and they created an algorithm. They made spiders and bots, and I won't go into the technical details of a search engine, but they built a system, an algorithm essentially, to determine what the most interesting web pages were, so that when a user connected with Google, that they were delivered, again, the most interesting content the user was looking for. That brings us to Facebook. Facebook's taking a look at the same ecosystem, and they're saying, there's going to be a shitload of content. And what we need to do is we need to connect the users with the most interesting content. And so that's why a lot of people say, Facebook's going to do this, going to do that, they're going to change this. And they go on, and they should get rid of Edgerank. And Edgerank's here to stay. And that's because Facebook understands its future. And they understand of how crazy it's really going to get. Think of when countries like China and India and all around the world, when they all have smartphones and they're all uploading photos. And we're just talking about people constantly checking into places, posting photos. All that content needs to be moderated in some way. Facebook uses the Edgerank algorithm to do it. In my opinion, the next company that is to potentially take down Facebook is a company that understands this concept to the next level. They say Facebook's vision is short-sighted, just as Yahoo looked at BBS and Google looked at Facebook, and says this new company might look at Facebook and say, you guys don't know what you're doing. We need to take this one step further. And so in my opinion, if you don't like how the Facebook newsfeed presents you content, you're going to be looking at a lifetime full of trying to moderate this much content, because we're in an era of unprecedented data and noise going through the newsfeed, and everywhere for that matter. This is the actual algorithm. This is something that Facebook came out and said, this is our algorithm. So they gave the actual algorithm out to the public. This was at F8 2010. I was the VP of social for a local agency, and we were doing a lot of Facebook management and Twitter management and things of that nature. And I was obsessed with when we published this one piece of content on the news feed, it received X amount of impressions or likes or comments. Then we posted another one and it got completely different. And it would always change and always vary. It didn't necessarily depend on how big the page was or how small it was. We could take a small page and some of our content would reach much farther than our big page. And so it was really interesting to me, and I was confused. And so I started dedicating myself to understanding this. At F8 2010, Facebook handed me a golden note essentially and said, this is the algorithm that actually determines it. And I was sitting there watching this conference and I thought to myself, oh my God, I can figure this out. I can solve this for brands who are trying to market on Facebook so they can understand how this Edgerank algorithm works. And more importantly, how to influence it so that you can achieve better results for brand marketing on Facebook organically through the newsfeed, as opposed to paying for it or just blasting 10 updates a day. The first variable is affinity. And so this is where the big money or the big value of the algorithm actually comes into play. What Facebook is trying to do is they're trying to understand the relationship between every user, every brand, every object, everything in its ecosystem. What they do with affinity is they want to monitor the relationship between two users. Now, one thing to note is this is a one-way relationship. So if I'm stalking my ex-girlfriend a ton, I'm going to see her stuff in my newsfeed a lot because Facebook thinks I have a high affinity with her. If she's ignoring me, then I'm not going to see necessarily her content. It's a one-way relationship. So it's important to to keep that in mind when you're talking about brands. So I'm going to talk about this more from the brand perspective. So when you have a brand like Nike, and Facebook's monitoring their relationship with their fans, they're the people who've liked their page, they want to know how close that relationship is. And the closer the relationship is, the more value they're going to give them, and the more value they give them, the more exposure in the newsfeed you're going to get. So from a brand perspective, the way that affinity is going to work, it's going to be ultimately about engagement. And so when I say engagement, I mean things like likes, comments, shares, checking out their timeline, posting to their timeline, sending a private message to the page, doing the different interactions that you're doing to the page. And so Facebook's taking a look at that and saying, you tend to either comment on Nike stuff or you tend to like their stuff. So we're seeing this kind of one-way relationship that you seem to be interested in Nike. Every time Reebok says something and you see it in the newsfeed and you ignore it, we're going to remember that too, to say you kind of ignored Reebok, but you clicked on Nike. So again, that's important because now if Nike and Reebok both post at the same time and you've always kind of historically ignored Reebok and you historically did stuff with Nike, you're probably going to see more content from Nike. So as a brand, it's your job to increase this engagement with your users so you increase this affinity variable of the algorithm. So the next part is weight. And so there's a lot of different interactions that happen within the newsfeed. There are likes, comments, clicks, shares. There's reporting things as spam, hiding a page, hiding your friends. There's posting a status update, posting a photo, there's all these different objects that are in the newsfeed. So what the other part of the algorithm that Facebook takes a look at is the weight. They say, what is the value of this interaction? So if you're creating content, it's going to take a look at something like if you created a status update versus a photo versus a link versus an album. Facebook's going to say, where do we see the most value? And what I recommend to anyone doing brand management for a brand is to say the more time it typically takes you to make the piece of content, the more valuable it ultimately ends up being. So we typically see the most value in photos, especially original photos that your team actually went out and took, or maybe a fan-created photo, something that you didn't just grab a stock image off the internet. Video, same thing, if you actually shot a video, where it's a lot easier to find a link to a random blog article or a random link to somewhere else, or just quick write up a status update, we typically see the lowest weight with those. So this is about understanding the kind of the quality of the interaction that happened. Last component is time decay. And so what Facebook's trying to do is they're trying to understand how old this piece of content is. They want to make sure that what you're seeing in the newsfeed is relatively fresh. If your best friend changed their profile photo a month ago, they know you probably don't want to see it. If your best friend just posted that they got engaged a minute ago, they really want to show you that because it just happened. Now, with that being said, Facebook, those other variables can kind of override time decay. So time decay isn't necessarily definitive, but it's basically just decreasing the value of older objects. I want to make sure that the newsfeed is fresh and constantly turning. So one thing interesting, I'll give you a little fact here. We did a study, it's probably been about 6 months ago or so now. I probably need to follow up on this again, but we found that the average piece of content on Facebook lived about 3 hours. And that's when you're just looking at a brand. That's not users. And that's only because we only have access really to the brand's data. But it's really interesting. I mean, your piece of content, you have a brand manager that might spend 30 minutes on building this piece of content, and it goes out into the ecosystem and lives for 3 hours and then it's dead. So it's important to understand when to time this stuff up. And I'll talk about that in my 3 tips to kind of how you take advantage of this algorithm. So the average Facebook page, when they publish out a piece of content, and they only reach about 16% of their fans. So these brands are spending millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars, or whatever their budget is, and they're acquiring fans through paid media, through earned media, TV ads, whatever they're doing to bring in fans. But what's happening is that a lot of them are going, wow, like we have 1 million fans, but we only reach 160,000 of these fans. Why is that? And again, it's that algorithm, Edgerank, that they haven't really optimized for. They're not doing things to kind of play into helping, have Edgerank helping their content as opposed to hurting it. The brands that are understanding this algorithm and kind of achieving positive results, they're reaching more towards 40% of their fans per post, which can be huge, we're talking about nearly 4 times the amount of results. And so ideally, if you're reaching, which means basically the object was shown in the news feed to 4 times as many people, that's what reach is how many people saw this. We're talking about ideally 4 times the amount of clicks. If we're sending them to a product, ideally that's 4 times the amount of sales than the average page. So understanding this and leveraging it to your advantage it can ideally result in multitudes higher of new business that you've already invested in acquiring these fans. Creating a call to action on a Facebook status update, for that matter, we typically find about a 90% increase in engagement when you're creating a call to action. Now, a lot of you have probably seen brands, they'll say, click like if you think this and comment if you disagree, and they're kind of getting boring with it, but they're increasing their average engagement, I'm sure of it, every time they post. So I recommend to be a little bit more creative with it. Try to spark debate with it. Maybe post an interesting. When I did brand management for this one company, we would do kind of like a trivia. We'd post a question or a photo and say, like, can you spot this hidden object in the photo? And what we're actually doing is we're creating a call to action for them to comment on the piece of content, which ultimately drove up our affinity with all those users, which comments have higher weights than likes. And then we increased the edge rank of that object, which increased its reach into the newsfeed, which hopefully reached 40% instead of 16%. So using the call to action can be huge, especially if you've done right. If you use your mind and try to not just say click like if you think this, or click like if you love being on the beach, or try to do something creative with it. A lot of brands do a lot of different things with that. So there's a lot of examples out there of the big brands trying this because it actually works. Like I said, 90% average increase in engagement when using a call to action to not using a call to action. But we're kind of shifting into a new era of social media, and that area is testing and monitoring your content. And I think that's really important. And it doesn't have to be a fancy process. You can export all this data in Facebook Insights into an Excel spreadsheet, and you can just simply go through and just grab things that either look at how your photos performed against your videos, or how your photos performed against a link, and just go through that entire process of looking at how all these different things play together. And if you start to understand these trends, then hopefully you can kind of maximize your results on that. And of course, at Edgerank Checker, we do that for you, but that's an important piece of content to understand. Just test and monitor this stuff to see what's working and what's not working, because a lot of people just don't. They fill a quota of, I'm going to post once a day, every day, and I'm not going to worry about it, and I'm going to look at the year-end report or the month-end report and go from there. But work to improve post lifetimes. What that basically means is try to post content. I talked about how the average piece of content lives about 3 hours. If you're testing and monitoring your content, and you know that you're getting most of your engagement, let's just say from 10 a.m. to noon. So if you know that piece of information, and let's say your average post lifetime was 3 hours as well, you're going to want to post that content at maybe 9:30 or 9:45, so that 2-hour window hits the 10 to noon period, and that you're attracting the engagement you received, and ideally, hopefully it'll live a little bit past that, so that you get extended post lifetime. So that's going to increase, again, your engagement. It's going to increase your affinity, which is going to increase the value of the edge rank of that object, which means the next time you post a piece of content, hopefully it reaches a little bit further. So if you understand how your lifetimes are working and how basically you're able to kind of understand when people are consuming your content, when they're not, it can be huge because you can then time it. Because let's say, again, that 3-hour time window, and let's say that 10 a.m. to noon period, if you post at 11:30 a.m. and you know that it's a 3-hour post lifetime and no one's on from 10 to 12, that piece of content is going to die. It's going to be dead, and you're going to be wasted your effort for the day. So it's about understanding a lot of this stuff and trying to optimize, because we're now in the area of optimization as opposed to you can't just be in Facebook anymore. You have to be doing things to optimize. Because that news feed that I was talking about is become more and more cluttered. There's going to be more and more content. More and more brands are doing this. There's going to be more and more paid sponsored posts that you've probably seen in the newsfeed. It'll say your friend likes Nike and it asks you to like it. There's more and more stuff going in there. So the brands that understand this, they're basically going to be able to leverage their organic value way higher than their paid value, and which is going to save them money so they don't have to pay Facebook to optimize for their content. So that's kind of the 3 tips that ultimately that can hopefully improve the average edge rank of your content. I was going to give you guys a 4th bonus tip, which was going to be to create an album. A lot of times posting a Facebook album on the newsfeed used to just kill it. It was amazing how much engagement and exposure you receive in the newsfeed. Although over the past week, we've been looking at a lot of the data and seeing that albums have been doing horribly all of a sudden. And it's kind of in line with this change that we kind of read. So my tip is going to be the opposite of that and say don't post photo albums for now because they seem to be either there's something wrong or there's a way decrease and stuff. So my 4th bonus tip is actually the opposite of my original one, which is try not to post photo albums right now until Facebook kind of figures everything out. So thank you.